Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. So excited to have Jesse Poppick back joining us here today, our coach, our facilitator, and I can tell by his smile he's happy because I think he's in Italy. Is that true?
It's true, Jill. In Milano, Italy today.
Beautiful. Yep. Well, hope you're enjoying yourself. Hails from New York City regularly, but he works with people all over and with honesty, sexuality, also coaching as far as sales is concerned, honesty coaching. I mean, he does a lot. Let me have him introduce himself to start. Go ahead, Jesse.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, my name is Jesse Poppick, and you can find out all about me at my website. It's www.jessepoppick.com. That's JESSEPOPPICK.com. So all of my details are there. And, last week I spent a lot of time talking about the coaching that I do, the types of coaching, talked a little bit about the 6 principles of sexual health, talked a little bit about honesty and radical honesty, the practice that I try to incorporate into my life on a daily basis. And what I wanted to do today was to get more into the details. I wanted to break the 6 principles of sexual health into the first 3 today, the next 3, the final 3 next week. But before I did that, I realized last week I talked about the Harvey Institute, right?
Yeah.
And where these 6 principles of sexual health come from. But I realized I didn't really give a lot of details about like what the heck is the Harvey Institute? What is that? Is that some made up place?
Yeah.
Is that some? So it's actually an organization that was developed by 2 guys named Harvey, and they are dedicated to promoting. Right? They developed and they promote the 6 principles of sexual health. So they as therapists, as sex therapists, they actually came together. I think built a bit of a congress with other therapists. And as a group, developed these 6 principles of sexual health. And the mission of the Harvey Institute is to, and I'm going to read it, is to foster sexual health conversations as a vital skill for professionals and individuals, ultimately enhancing overall well-being. Yeah, they're pretty cool. And they actually are trying to promote discussions about the 6 principles of sexual health in the workplace. They offer services in terms of training for therapists and for other advocates who actually want to bring these principles into healthcare, human services, law enforcement. It's a really interesting organization.
Interesting. Well, we're excited to have you here back with us and to talk about this. Thank you. So let's dive into number 1.
Yeah. So number 1 is consent. Surprise, surprise. I talked a little bit about this last week as well. Right. Consent is very on topic these days with the whole Me Too movement. And really consent from the 6 principles standpoint means that all sexual activities really should be based on mutual agreement. Right. Okay. And respect between all parties who are involved in whatever's happening. And I imagine this also means that if it suggests this type of consent would suggest freely giving permission for sexual activities to occur, but also not. Right. I mean, without getting ahead of myself too much, I do think that consent means something different if you're in a monogamous relationship versus if you're in a non-monogamous relationship or a non-traditional relationship, right? And I imagine too that like consent, based on what the 6 principles are trying to put forward, is based on informed and enthusiastic, voluntary consent. And I can imagine too, like in my experience, and Jill, I wonder if you've had this as well. Like, have all of your sexual experiences been with your consent, or because I can tell you that for me, probably not. Right?
No, yeah, you know what? I mean, for the most part, but there's been times where I didn't want to, but I still did. So you know what? That's right. I guess I haven't been raped. I haven't been to that point. No, but there has been times where I did not want to engage in any sexual activity, but I kind of felt bad. I kind of gave in. I think a lot of people do that sometimes to make their partner happy or to just make them leave you alone. To be honest, right? Yeah. So you're right. You're right. But
I mean, if we give consent, I think in those situations in order to maybe avoid other situations.
Yes, 100%.
Right. And I think for women, to your point, you may say yes in order to just get it over with, or to I hate to say it, I hate to belittle it, but like, just to get someone to ultimately leave you alone. I think for men, interestingly enough, that the consent piece is, I think for many men, if a woman is interested in having sex with them, they feel like they can't say no.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that if a man is presented with an opportunity to have some sort of sexual interaction with a woman, that it would be really difficult for them to say no. Their masculinity might be questioned if they said no. And so I think in those cases too, you have men who are perhaps doing, as you described, saying yes when they really want to say no, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, the other thing about consent too, I mean, based on the principles that the Harvey Institute is putting forward is so enthusiastic, voluntary consent, absolutely, right? But also that consent can be removed at any time. So if in the middle of some sort of sexual activity that one is participating in, if something feels uncomfortable, if something's happening that you really aren't into,
Yeah.
but you can pull the consent. You can say, you know what, I actually don't want to do that, or
Yeah.
I'm not feeling this anymore. And I imagine that's a super scary thing to say, right? If
Mm-hmm.
we're in the middle of doing something intimate, pumping the brakes like that might be a challenge for either party, I imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and because of that, because two people can start with conformed and enthusiastic and voluntary consent, it also suggests, at least from these guys' perspective, from the Harvey Institute perspective, that it's an ongoing process. That maybe during lovemaking or during some sort of sexual exchange, that you're checking in with each other to see how things are going. And I imagine this is part of the communication that maybe sometimes is overlooked when people are thrown together in an intimate way.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, consent ensures that all sexual interactions, right, are based on a foundation of respect, autonomy. So the individuals get to decide to kind of rule them over themselves, rule over their bodies, and hopefully mutual desire, right? I mean,
Yeah.
again, enthusiastic consent would imply we're both into this, right? We both want to get into this. Yeah, and I appreciate your honesty when it comes to suggesting that maybe you've done stuff that you really, if looking back and given another choice, you might have opted out. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
So it's interesting too that consent leads, I think, very naturally, and perhaps this was designed by the Harvey Institute with some thought. But the second pillar or the second principle of sexual health is non-exploitative. So
Mm-hmm.
non-exploitative sexual health requires, or in this terminology, right, this would mean that sex be non-exploitive. The sexual activities should not involve exploitation, coercion, or manipulation. And similarly, I want to be the first one to suggest that I have probably engaged in sex that was potentially questionable about in terms of exploitation. I visited sex workers for a long time. I mentioned this
Yeah,
in
you
last
told
week,
me.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And I have no idea, to be honest with you, how many of them might have been being exploited, and I just didn't even know it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, our interaction might have been what it was, but in terms of who they worked for, why they were there, it's not 100%. I can't be 100% sure
Mm-hmm.
that there was an exploitation happening,
Yeah.
Which is pretty disturbing. And I imagine this is something that, I am definitely pro sex work and pro sex workers, with the exception of people who are being forced into sex work, right? This
Yeah.
is
Without
clearly
against their will. Yep. Mm-hmm.
exactly right, against their will. So non-exploitive, this principle is designed to suggest that all parties involved should participate willingly,
Okay.
right, and without pressure, and that consent really can't be valid if someone is taking advantage of another person's vulnerability in whatever way,
Okay.
financially, emotionally. If someone is being coerced or manipulated, that's exploitive.
Yeah.
You know. Again, I'm going to turn it back to you, Jill. I mean, can you look back and think? I mean, have you ever considered a situation where you were kind of manipulated, or I don't want to say tricked, but coerced in some way? Again, so even what you were saying before, Jill, quite honestly,
Yeah.
about saying yes to something you wanted to say no to.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, to me, that's kind of like coercion, but at the same time, yeah, it kind of is. But other than that, no, it's been those times in my life where I really didn't want to have sex or engage in any activity, but I just gave in to make my partner or the person I was with at the time happy, to appease them
Yeah.
in a sense. But no, I've been thankful. I mean, I know as a young teenager, I do remember an older a teenager who, was like the beginning of, making out and experimenting. And he tried going a little too far, and I kept pushing him away. And I didn't want him to touch me any further. And he kept
Mm,
trying, and I pushed him. So, but nothing happened. But yeah, I mean, that still stays in your head where you really wanted to say no and you were saying no. And someone's trying to, go over that your boundary, because we all have boundaries, right? Yeah, but no, never been exploited. No, not myself personally, but I know, gosh, you hear so many stories about these human sex traffickers, and there is even in New York City. And there was a paper,
yeah.
the article, you're a New Yorker, in the Post a few weeks ago, with all these sex workers walking around Brooklyn and New York City. And you know, good for them if that's what they want to do. But are they being coerced by a pimp, by someone out there? Are they taken illegally from somewhere? And
Yeah.
you don't know.
Yeah, you don't know. And so I imagine when it comes to that, you really have to question whether or not what you're doing in terms of visiting sex workers is rooted in this type of problem. I don't. To be honest with you, Jill, too. Even in a state like Nevada, where prostitution is legal, or in countries where prostitution is legal, I'm still not sure that
Yeah.
that legal prostitution is void of exploitive situations. Right? I
Hmm.
imagine that there still are men and women who are still being exploited, even in those situations where prostitution is legal. Right?
Yeah.
So anyway, so consent number one, non-exploitive number two, and then the third principle kind of underscores, I would imagine, all of the rest, and certainly the first two, and that's honesty.
Hmm.
Right? Um, Honesty in sexual health requires open and clear communication, right, with oneself.
Hmm.
Sometimes can be difficult, and every sexual partner that someone might be with. Honesty in sexual relationships involves clear and transparent communication. And you saying to the dude, stop, 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 or pushing him away, like, that's pretty clear communication. That's you being honest in that situation. Like, I've had enough. Stop touching me. And I'm sorry to hear that it required multiple suggestions for him to shoo away. But I imagine in that situation, you clearly were being honest with
Yeah.
him. And whether we're talking about a one night stand or an ongoing relationship, I mean, honest communication absolutely should, I imagine, create a mutual understanding between partners. Again, even if it's temporary, and also is a bridge to building trust between partners. Again, even if it's momentary.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I spent a long time, hiding and not being very honest about my sexuality and what I was doing and where I was going and who I was seeing. So, one of the things I really enjoy about talking about these six principles is also reflecting back on myself and how healthy have I been in my past. If I look at these six, right,
Hmm.
um, and they certainly, all six and these first three, allow anyone to really gauge, to say, what am I doing right now? Is
Hmm.
how I'm behaving and how I'm interacting, is this healthy based on these six principles, right? And it doesn't mean that everyone has to be healthy all the time. I mean, let's be honest, people smoke cigarettes, people drink alcohol, and there's warning labels on those things, talking about how addictive they might be or how they might lead to sickness. So people choose to be unhealthy all the time.
Hmm.
Um, and there's still a gauge, right? There's still some signpost or some way to measure up to say, well, how healthy am I being, right? Um, yeah. So the honesty piece is I think really an underpinning for all of the other five principles. It does suggest that people ought to be able to express their needs. That means you have to know what your needs are, which is why the open
Yeah.
and direct communication with oneself is so
So
important and
important.
can be
Hmm.
really hard, right? I mean, some people don't know what they desire. They don't know what their concerns might be. They don't know what they want.
Hmm.
Um, so how can you communicate that if you haven't actually been yet honest with yourself about what you want?
Hence the honesty coach in him, Jesse Poppick.
Ah,
Perfect segue, just to remind everyone who we're talking to and how we can reach you, and then we'll
yep,
continue with our six principles. Thank you.
absolutely. Absolutely. So, I mean, I hit the third one, but to
Yeah.
find out more, www.jessepoppick.com, JESSEPOPPICK.com. And these six principles certainly guide a lot of what I do in terms of my work with individuals and couples. I also want to follow the suggestion of the Harvey Institute to try to bring these discussions into the workplace. As counterintuitive as that might sound, a lot of these things can be reflected pretty straightforwardly into a work environment. I know that sounds perhaps scary. I imagine some people think, "How the hell are you going to talk about sex at work?" But a lot of these principles really can reflect less a sexual relationship, but more just a relationship with coworkers and managers and such, which I'm going to talk about in coming weeks. One thing I also wanted to talk about a little bit too, when it comes to honesty and sort of following along with these six principles, have you ever heard of a RBDSM conversation?
No, I have not.
Interesting. So there is an international organization called ISTA,
Okay.
and I don't know if they established this acronym, but they certainly promote it, as do other sex therapists, people within the tantric community. And what an RBDSM, it sounds like I imagine some sort of sexual acronym.
Mm-hmm.
It stands for relationship, boundaries, desires, sexual health, and meaning.
Oh.
And what this BDSM conversation is suggested to do would be, if you and I were attracted to each other, we could sit down and I could tell you first, what is my relationship status?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Am I single? And this, of course, goes back to the whole underpinning of being honest. Am I
Yeah.
single? And I'm in a relationship? Am I in a relationship that allows me to have sexual activities outside of my primary partner? Like, what is my relationship status?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So relationship is sort of the under. Am I single? What can I do? And the two people or more really have to think about how honest they can be
Yeah.
to reveal that. And then boundaries. Right. So if we're having this conversation, it might be implied that we're physically attracted to each other. So what are my physical boundaries? Like, if we were to engage in some sort of sexual activity, what are my physical boundaries? No, I don't want you to play with my ass, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe I
Yeah.
do, or you know
Yeah.
what I mean? But like, being able to reveal that in an open and honest way.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't like when people stroke my hair or whatever it is, right? And then the boundaries also, I imagine, include beyond physical boundaries, but what other boundaries might you be engaging in with another person intimately? Physical, I think, is the most straightforward.
Yeah.
Desires. Again, this goes to knowing what your desires are. Can you reveal your desires to this person? Are you open are you clear enough with your own desires to be able to have this discussion?
Mm-hmm.
And then sexual health. And the overarching conversation there is about, when was the last time you were tested? How often are you tested? In New York City, I get tested regularly. And interestingly enough, I feel like I've been fed a whole line about how liberal Europe is, whether it's Italy or Germany or other European nations. And so I just assumed free, sexual health, sexual disease testing was available to people here in Europe. Not so.
Really?
Yeah. And they make it really difficult. And they question you, why are you here? They question your morality about, like, why are you even here? And very rarely is it free. And very rarely is it fully comprehensive. So,
Oh.
yeah, so we actually have it better off in the United States in terms of, I can go down to City Health and I can get a full panel, HIV, all STDs,
No
ureaplasma, with
questions asked.
no
Welcome. Open
questions
the door.
asked,
Thank you. Yep. Mm-hmm.
right?
As it
Um,
should be. But
as it should be. So the sexual health question, it's an interesting one that they include this, and I have found it really surprising with different people in different parts of the world. Their access to testing is far more limited in some cases than I had thought, than I had first thought.
mm-hmm.
And then the last part, so that's the S part, but the last part is the meaning. Right? What meaning are we taking out of this? Are we just going to have a fling? We'll have fun tonight, and I'll see you later. Or if we engage in this sexual activity together, are we a couple? Like, what are our intentions? What is our meaning behind proceeding with messing around with each other?
Mm-hmm.
So the BDSM conversation has its roots deeply penetrating into the honesty part, the honesty principle of sexual health. Yeah, it's an interesting conversation. You can even have, I mean, I imagine if you're in a committed monogamous relationship, the RBDSM conversation maybe isn't practical or needed or necessary, but it would be an interesting
It
one,
could be. No, it definitely could be for sure.
right? I mean, when was
Yeah.
the last time you? When was the last time you and your partner sat down and actually talked about this stuff? Right? What
Oh,
are your desires?
I don't even have a partner now, so it doesn't matter. I have a 6 and 8 year
Oh,
old, and that's it. So there's been no sex or no conversation. There's been none of that, which is okay for now. You go through different stages in your life. But
sure.
I'm like you, I'm very honest. And I'm trying to think my last relationship I was in for 2 years. Um, yeah, there, but I think I was with someone who was definitely less open, less communicative, less, had to have the lights off, but more embarrassed, more with their yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and it had to be a certain way or else it wasn't the right way for him. There was no meeting of the minds when it came to sex. It was more, but we've all been in different relationships. I get it. I get it. But yeah, I'm yeah, I need to be with someone who's like can really talk about what they like, what they don't like. Just like you said, I'm that person, and I'm normally in a monogamous relationship if and when I am or have been. But
Yep.
I am that open person to bring all those types of things up, like you
Yeah.
mentioned before with that list. Yeah.
Yeah, the RBDSM, and honestly, Jill, you couldn't have lined up better. Next week, in our next session, I want to talk about the next three principles of sexual health, and the fourth one is shared values, right? So, in your description of like the partner you were with, maybe I don't want to have sex with the lights off. Like, what are our values when it comes around sex and sexuality, and are we compatible? And even if, and we can choose not to be. Like, we can make
Yeah.
a conscious say, hey, what I'm into and what you're into are two different things. And maybe that's okay. Or maybe that's not. Maybe that's, hey, that's a deal breaker for me.
Yeah.
So, having that conversation and whether it's surrounded with this RBDSM acronym or simply just saying, hey, listen, my values around sex are this, that, and the other. What are yours?
Yeah.
Right. And do they align at all? Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because if they don't, well, then this is something to think about, something to notice, something to consider. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So
Yeah.
we have 6 principles. And by the way, remind us again about the Institute itself. Tell us a little bit of the
So,
background and how you.
yep. The Harvey Institute is simply an institute that I have been positively influenced by in my studies and through my certifications around sexual health and as a sexual health consultant. The Harvey Institute established with, I think, a congress of therapists and sex therapists, these 6 principles of sexual health. And just to run down all 6 again: consent, non exploitive, honest, shared values, um, protection, so protection from disease and protection from unwanted pregnancy. And lastly, but not least by any means, pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
The 6 principles of sexual health. And again, as a signpost for anyone who's questioning
Yeah.
their sexual activities, what is my sexual health? Can I take my own temperature here? Well,
Mm-hmm.
looking at these 6 principles allows someone to determine how healthy am I being. Again, am I smoking 6 packs of cigarettes and drinking a jug of wine every day? Because that's not so healthy, right?
Yeah.
Or am I eating a healthy diet? I'm exercising, and so again, how do I measure my health? Well, when it comes to these 6 principles, I think these all can be used to say, hey, you know what? I'm doing 5 out of 6. That's pretty good. I don't, I don't think there's a requirement to be 100% healthy. I don't think people are 100% healthy with most things in their lives most of the time. But it's nice to be able to look at a potential list of principles or priorities and say, wow, I can check off several of these boxes. So that's good.
Absolutely. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. All right. Jesse Poppick joining
Jill,
us. How can we reach out to you directly?
so the best and easiest way is through my website, www.jessepoppick.com, JESSEPOPPICK.com. The email address, if you want to email me for more information as well, is YOUU@jessepoppick.com. And Jill, I'm so looking forward to talking about the next
The other
3
principles.
principles. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Pleasure having you here. Enjoy Italy. What time is it there right now, by the way?
It is almost 7 p.m.
Fantastic. Enjoy your evening. Some wine with dinner. Does everyone drink wine there or what? Right?
Of course.
Okay.
Italy. I'm in Italy.
All
Of
right,
course.
good. Enjoy. And some
Thanks, Jill.
pasta. And then the men call it gravy, not the sauce. But enjoy. You have a great day.
Thanks,
Bye,
Jill.
Jesse.
You too. Good talking to
Thank
you.
you. You too.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned. This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.